It's time to break down players 80 through 71 in our top 100 fantasy football players of the 2000s. Let's tune in. Now, guys, if you're just tuning in for the first time, you probably want to go watch the other videos to see the other players that we talked about up until this point. But just a quick reminder, a lot of this is objective data. Went through and looked at how guys did as far as their peak fantasy performances, number one, number two overall at their position, or number one overall, two overall, period. And then also looked at how long they did it for, gave those things different point numerical values, and then spit out the data. I adjusted it slightly myself, depending on guys that I thought maybe should be a little bit higher, a little bit lower, based on some small little things like injuries and points per game and different things that I wanted to add in there. But overall, this was a pretty objective process with a little bit of subjectivity sprinkled in. So without further ado, let's get into 80 through 71. Number 80, we have Jeff Garcia. Overall, this was not a name I expected to see in the list of top 100. But Jeff Garcia, early on in the 2000s, was actually really elite for fantasy football. Back to back, number one overall quarterback finishes. Then he had two more finishes where he was a just general quarterback one, not the number one overall, but still 4 seasons in a row where he was great for fantasy football. And 2 of those were absolutely elite. So he's not going to have the longevity of some of these other quarterbacks that we talk on here of 6, 7, 8 seasons. But the peak was so high that he jumped into our top 80, playing for the San Francisco 49ers, amongst a lot of other teams, but it was those Niners years that he was truly elite. At 79, we have Joe Mixon. Yes, Joe Mixon, 2 top 6 fantasy football seasons during his career, and 2 more where he was a running back 1. So 4 running back 1 seasons for Joe Mixon. Pretty good. And then you add in that he also had another season where he was a running back 2, but during that time he was actually running back 13. So he just missed the cut of having 5 running back 1 seasons, and he did all that in a 6-year span. So 5 top tier seasons in a matter of only 6 years is pretty darn good. And he's not done either. He just signed a deal with the Houston Texans where he's going to be their featured back. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility to see an additional running back 1 season or so there during that time. It's all going to depend on, is he still the guy getting all the touches on the ground? And is he getting enough through the air? We'll have to wait and see. But Joe Mixon could maybe even jump another 10 spots or so, depending on how well he plays this coming season. This one's more of a longevity. We talked about the peak for Jeff Garcia. This one's more about longevity. Hines Ward. When you're looking at the longevity, it's 8 seasons where he was either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2. Now, he didn't quite have the peak that some of these other guys had. Only 1 season where he was top 3, but the longevity factor here got him a lot of points in our model. And overall, if you think back, he was a really useful fantasy asset for a long time. So having Hines Ward on this list really does make a lot of sense. Yes, I know he didn't have those seasons where he carried you as much, but you need those low-end wide receiver 1s, high-end wide receivers 2s as well to really fill out your lineup and sustain you. And so I think with the longevity factor here, he's deserving of a top 80 selection, and he comes in here, the Pittsburgh Steeler, at 78. Man, for this next guy, if we could only get his seasons in the 90s a part of this as well, he would be really high on our list. Now, a lot of the younger folks in here maybe only know him as the commentator, but Shannon Sharp was an elite tight end. When you look at his years in Denver in the 90s, just so many top 6 finishes, finished out his career in Baltimore and was still very good there. In fact, he only had 4 seasons that we have for the 2000s, but those 4 seasons where he was a top 6 guy, top 6 in all 4 of those, and 3 of those 4 seasons, he wasn't just top 6, he was top 3. So 4 straight seasons where you know you're getting elite tight end production cannot be undervalued. Look, there's so many tight end options, and it's really hard to get an elite guy, especially for multiple seasons in a row that you can just plug in and count on. Shannon Sharpe, more than just a commentator, a great, and dare I even say elite tight end when we're talking about some of the all-time GOATs. But for the 2000s, he ranks here at 77. Another player here at 76 that maybe the longevity wasn't quite there, but the peak was unreal. We're talking 4 straight wide receiver 1 seasons for Michael Thomas. Yes, Michael Thomas had 4 straight wide receiver 1 seasons. 3 of those 4, top 6 at wide receiver. That's really, really impressive. And then when you factor in his wide receiver over 1 overall campaign where he was just truly a monster at the position, Michael Thomas was elite. Now, unfortunately, had some foot injuries there in 2020, 2021, and that really just caused him to drop off the face of the earth. We didn't have a single wide receiver 2 season, nothing after that 2019 season, but he was so good in that short time period that he made our list here at player number 76. At 75, we kind of have the antithesis of what we had out of Michael Thomas, and it's A.J. Green. A.J. Green didn't have quite the peak that we had out of Michael Thomas, but he still had a really good career. We're talking 6 seasons where he was a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2, and 4 of those seasons he was a wide receiver 1. Had one of those seasons inside the top 3, so he had a really nice run there. He's always going to be compared to his counterpart, Julio Jones, who was drafted just a few picks later in the same draft class. And of course, he didn't quite have the career that Julio Jones had. But when we're talking about some of the best wide receivers of the 2000s, A.J. Green absolutely is on that list. And his time specifically in Cincinnati with Andy Dalton, they were really good together, and he lands on our list at 75. Player number 74 didn't quite have the draft capital of a lot of the other names on our list, but man, he has carved out a very good career for himself. The former Green Bay Packer, now Minnesota Viking, Aaron Jones, 4 straight RB1 seasons. And even the season before those 4 straight, he was a running back too. Now, had he been able to get a lot more work early on and wasn't splitting time with Jamal Williams, we would see even better numbers out of Aaron Jones. But his pass catching has truly put him in spots where he has become a top tier asset in the fantasy football world in recent memory. Now, will he be able to continue that success in Minnesota? It's a little bit more tricky to figure that out. He is getting a little bit older now at age of 30. Maybe he's got one more running back 1 or 2 season in him, but it's hard to imagine he's going to get much more than that. But still, Aaron Jones, very good fantasy football asset over the past 4 or 5 years. Man, this guy was so good for so long. At 73, Anquan Boldin, 9 of his 12 seasons, he was either a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2. So you're talking about a consistent piece. If you're playing Dynasty, so consistent for so long on your fantasy football teams. Now, he didn't have the amazing peak that we see out of some of these other guys, but he did have 2 top 6 seasons, never a wide receiver 1 overall, no top 3 seasons, but we did get 2 top 6 seasons. So he was giving you some pretty good top end numbers, but it was more the longevity with Anquan Boldin. He kicked off his rookie campaign with a top 6 season, and that was just really, really good almost every single year after that, all the way up until 2014. So yes, another one where we don't quite have the peak, but we have the longevity. And that's what you get at this point. A lot of these guys either have the peak or the longevity. Very few will have both. And if they do, they're going to be a little bit higher up on our list. Another one like Shannon Sharpe, if we would have just been able to include the 90s, we're talking about a top 10 guy on our list. But we don't get to do that. So the early years with the Colts and a few of the years with the Rams are not included in this for Marshall Faulk, but still was so good that he is still at 72 for us. He was the number 1 overall running back in back-to-back seasons in the 2000 and 2001. He was number 1 running back overall. Did still have 1 additional running back 1 season and then 2 RB2 seasons. And I think people forget that, yes, he was great between the tackles, but it was the receiving game that really bolstered Marshall Faulk. He had some elite pass catching seasons at the running back position, and that really bolstered him up. But he's another one where I would love to do this if I'm able to include 90s numbers as well, but can't do it. We got to stay true to what we said. It's for the year 2000 and on. And so Marshall Faulk lands here at number 72. When we talk about peak, this is another guy that really epitomizes that. And you might not be expecting to hear this name, but recent addition, Austin Ekeler. Austin Ekeler only has only three running back 1 or running back 2 seasons. However, 3 of these 4 years in a row, he was running back 4 in 2019, running back 2 in 2021, and running back 1 overall in 2022. So Austin Ekeler, not just putting up good seasons, truly elite seasons in 3 of 4 years, dealt with injuries in 2020. But man, Austin Ekeler has been so good. And when you consider that this was a player that was undrafted, had to deal with some injuries, being a little banged up, then had to deal with being behind Melvin Gordon for a few seasons, for him to be able to put up these numbers and ultimately end up being ahead of Melvin Gordon on this list, really just a really impressive campaign that we got out of Austin Ekeler. These years are probably done. He's now in Washington. I'm not expecting quite as much out of Austin Ekeler, but man, the peak that we got out of this player was something special. Guys, that wraps up our list from 80 to 71. Tomorrow, we will give you the list of 70 through 61. So make sure you come back for that.